think we can just get started because appreciate y'all being here. I'm going to invite Anna actually to come and do our welcome.
Hi, welcome. Everyone, thank you so much for coming tonight. This is our last and final public meeting for the Consolidated Plan outreach efforts, which will be used to form our 5-year spending plan per HUD, which is the Consolidated Plan, also the impediments to fair housing choice, and also the feedback will be utilized to form the housing plan that is currently underway. We just really appreciate you spending your time tonight and really value your input. I want to thank Angela Van Roy, who has helped facilitate these meetings. She is a real pro. We also have Deborah Meyerson, a consultant, helping us with these outreach efforts. And I believe online we also have MNL, who is our consultant, helping us put the plan together. Deborah?
Okay, I will. Thank you. Appreciate that. I'm Deborah Meyerson with Meyerson Consulting. Thank you all for coming here tonight. I will actually hand it over briefly to MNL, the MNL team, who is the lead consultant on this project, just so that you can see them and hear from them, and they will be part of facilitating stuff, especially for the folks that are here online. Is that something we can let MNL do a quick hello and intro? If not, we'll loop back. Okay, nice.
Can you hear me now? Yeah. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for coming out today. We really appreciate your attendance tonight, and we really look forward to your input. Again, my name is Bill Wasilewski, president of Mullen and Lonergan Associates, and with me is Samantha and Kevin, and I'll turn it over to them and let them introduce themselves. But again, thank you for coming out this evening, and we really appreciate your time tonight.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. My name is Samantha Walters-Lewis, and I am a community development specialist with MNL.
Hi, everyone. And I'm Kevin Tang, and I'm also a housing and community development specialist with MNL.
Thank you all. And we'll head back to the slides if we can. Nice. Thank you. So as Anna mentioned, this is the last of the public meetings. We've had 9 meetings total, a combination of public general meetings as well as some stakeholder workshops to specializing in particular topics. Next slide, please. Okay. So as Anna mentioned, this is for 3 different documents. It's the consolidated planning process. Every 5 years, the city must complete a consolidated plan to set priorities for the use of community development block grant funds, also known as CDBG, and home investment partnership funds. These are both federal sources of money that are allocated to the city of Bloomington, and this planning process helps direct how those funds are spent locally based on local needs. In addition, every year the city prepares an annual action plan to describe to the public and HUD how it intends to spend its annual allocation. The 5-year plan also includes the first year plan of the 5-year cycle. So just a brief overview about what these documents are. Again, we talked about 3 documents here. One is the analysis of impediments to fair housing choice, also known as AI. Identifies barriers that restrict housing choice from members of protected classes and recommendations to resolve those barriers. Then there's the consolidated plan, different than the comprehensive plan, that's a land use plan. The consolidated plan describes community development priorities and goals over the next 5 years based on an assessment of affordable housing and community development needs, market conditions, and available resources. And finally, the annual action plan, again, describes how the city will use these federal funds to address identified needs in 2025. So this is developing the fiscal year 2025 plan. So I'll just talk briefly about a little bit more about each of these sources and documents. First, it'll be Community Development Block Grant Program Basics. So CDBG, as we like to call it, is administered by HUD, the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, and cities, states, and some counties are eligible to receive these funds annually from HUD. And the overarching goals of CDBG are to provide decent, safe, and sanitary housing, provide a suitable living environment, and to expand economic opportunities. The activities that are funded by CDBG must meet certain national objectives, which includes providing benefits to low and moderate income persons, preventing or eliminating slum and blight, as well as meeting an urgent need that threatens the health and welfare of residents. I'll just also note there's some questions about what's eligible, what's not. Private nonprofits that are corporations, associations, agencies, or those with nonprofit status are eligible to apply for funding, as well as city departments. And then the activities that can be funded include housing rehabilitation, public facilities and improvements, public services, demolition, acquisition, and program administration. So some of the ineligible costs include fundraising, political activities, expenses that would be required to carry out regular responsibilities or functions of local government, income payments, building or a portion thereof used for general conduct of government, as well as the purchase of fixtures, motor vehicles, furnishings, or other personal properties. It's not a comprehensive list, but it's a sample of the kind of things that are not to be funded by these sources. So qualifying and eligible activity, again, must serve low to moderate income households and individuals, at least 70% of the funds, address slum and blight, no more than 30% of the funds, and then qualifying how do you define low or moderate income, or how do you find them? How do you know when they're there? One can be an area benefit, a service area for a public improvement or facility, income intake, where you have programs that serve primarily low and moderate income individuals and families are eligible for funding, and the definition of a moderate income family is no more than 80% of the area median income as adjusted for household size. And then finally, a third qualification is presumed benefit. Some groups are assumed to be low moderate income. These include abused children, battered spouses, elderly persons, disabled persons, homeless persons, illiterate adults, migrant farm workers, and persons living with AIDS. Again, so different ways that programs can meet that requirement. Next, we'll talk about home investment partnership program basics. The home investment partnership funding is designed to help provide safe and decent housing for low and moderate income households. Eligible activities include rental housing, owner-occupied housing, home buyer assistance, rehabilitation, new construction, as well as tenant-based rental assistance. A minimum of 15% of each year's home allocation must be used for a community housing and development organizations project. This is an organization that's sometimes abbreviated as CHODO. A certified CHODO is a community-based nonprofit organization focused on increasing affordable housing, and the board of that organization is composed with community residents that represent the populations being served. And finally, we'll talk about analysis of impediments to fair housing choice. Affordable housing and fair housing definitely should complement each other, but they are not the same thing. So HUD recommends that communities update their AI every 5 years. The AI identifies barriers that restrict housing choice for members of protected classes. It uses demographic and housing data to determine what those impediments are that are limiting fair housing choice in a jurisdiction, but also, and again, this is why we're so glad you're here today, to use input from stakeholder participation to identify potential impediments, because the stories that people have can be very helpful to understand the real scope of barriers to fair housing. And finally, the development of a Fair Housing Action Plan proposes specific actions to address identified impediments to fair housing. just a little clarification about what fair housing means and refers to. The Federal Fair Housing Act protects people from discrimination when they are renting or buying a home, getting a mortgage, seeking housing assistance, or engaging in other housing-related activities. So both renters and homeowners or home buyers. And then there's what's called 7 protected classes. There can be more at the state or local level, but these are the federally defined protected classes. And that includes race, color, national origin, religion, sex, which includes gender identity and sexual orientation, familial status, and disability. So the schedule for the overall update of the documents I've just mentioned, we are again on the last of our 9 public meetings that we've held over the last couple of weeks. Now that we have all this qualitative data gathered, as well as we have a survey that we'll share. I know that the folks who are online may get that survey link in the chat. We'll have it at the end of these slides as well. But in terms of the scope of where the public input is coming from, we will then be, and that survey closes September 10th, we'll then have a draft plan completed for review internally by mid-November, and then the draft annual action plan by March, and then we'll have one more public comment period, including one more public meeting to show the draft plans that have been produced so people can look at them, provide comment, and help refine that further. And then in early May, Council will have the opportunity to approve these documents. They'll be submitted to HUD, and that will be all in time for the program fiscal year 2025 starting July 1st. So we have some questions. These are not the only questions, but it's meant to help launch discussion, because again, I've done a bunch of talking. We really want to hear from you all who've come to join us today, as well as the folks who are here online. We are having a hybrid meeting, so we'll go back and forth between the folks in person and the folks online. But these are just to help prompt your thoughts. We'd love to hear what barriers you or others in your community face when trying to access affordable housing. How do current city policies and programs impact your community's ability to find safe and affordable housing? In your experience, are there neighborhoods or areas in the city where affordable housing is more difficult to find? If so, what factors contribute to this issue? What types of affordable housing assistance or programs could help to ensure fair access to affordable housing? And then finally, again, suggested questions. Are there any specific groups in the community who you understand as facing greater challenges to finding affordable housing or experiencing more housing discrimination? And what can the city do to address these challenges? So these are, again, some starter thoughts. To engage your public comment, we are recording this. There is a mic up here, so I want to encourage you to come and use the mic to ask questions, make comments, and your questions may be any of the ones that I've just described or something else, or even just questions about the overall process are certainly welcome as well. So I will take a pause there and invite folks both online and in person to share your comments or questions. Yes, thank you for making the hike.
So, my name is Jen. Is this on?
Is that mic working? Okay, sounds like it's on now.
Oh, okay. My name is Jen Pearl, and I'm the president of the Bloomington Economic Development Corporation. And so our mission is to help attract and retain quality, high-paying jobs for the community. Housing comes up very regularly in the work that we do. So when employers are looking to come here,
just closer to the mic. Yeah.
That's counterintuitive. Yeah, thank you. When employers are looking to come here, to grow jobs, one of the first things they ask about is workforce and the ability to have, a great workforce living nearby. And so the work that we do is very tied up together in housing access. The questions you just had on the screen, if it's possible to put that back on the screen. I wanted to try to address two of those. Something that we've seen recently is that our demographics have been shifting. So we're seeing that we have an aging population. And that is something that I feel like is impacting kind of housing demand here. And this is US Census data, but we've added 5,000 people over age 65 from the years 2012 to 2022. And the Indiana Business Research Center anticipates that we're going to add another couple thousand people by 2030, while the overall population remains flat. So that is a concern if we're trying to attract and retain talent to help our community remain vibrant and, to keep people running the community as well as caring for our neighbors who are aging in place. So if I remember correctly, the two questions that were up there in terms of like what is impacting the ability to have quality housing for everyone, and then what are policies that may impact this. Number one is the overall market. And so the overall market forces that we're seeing here in terms of policies, really around zoning and sewer. So because a lot of sort of county decisions have been made recently around kind of keep urban, urban, rural, rural, it sort of pushes development either into the city or out towards Ellettsville or out to outerlying counties. So that has a bigger impact on people having to commute. The cost of time and money for commuting has an environmental impact. And then it can also drive up prices where we are currently. And so at the same time, understanding that the city has been going through annexation proceedings and has not been extending sewer for new housing developments or other developments in certain area, that can also impact the ability to develop housing that's affordable because it just makes the market kind of more exacerbated.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Mention that Jen's describing the issues with the overall market pushing up prices and making it more limited. The fact that the focus here is on low and moderate income households, if even higher income households are not getting their housing needs met, that places even more pressure and difficulty with developing housing for low and moderate income households. Welcome.
Hi, I'm Gretchen Null. I own Bloomington Rentals and Realty. I wasn't planning on speaking, but since you're asking people to, I will. So the question that was up there that said, what specific things is the city doing that's impacting ability to find affordable housing? So I'd like to address the HAND permit program, which is the Housing Area Neighborhood Development Renters Permit Program that's been in place for so many years, that says in many neighborhoods, even if you have a 4 or 5 or 6 bedroom house, you can only rent to 3 people. So we got empty bedrooms right downtown. And even if you can provide parking, off-street parking for these people, the city will only, believe it or not, you can have a 7-bedroom house and rent it to 3 people. That law has got to change. And these are core neighborhoods right downtown. So, and then the city, I know a lot of people think, well, why are so many people turning to Airbnb? Well, because you don't have those same restraints if you do that. So you're taking away long-term housing because of this really restrictive HAND permit program. It's outdated, it's antiquated, it's borderline racist, and it just has to go away. Okay, the next thing is, what else is the city doing to impact your ability to find safe and affordable housing? I have probably, I don't know, over 100 tenants in Bloomington, and we have had issues with break-ins, with people defecating outside of our tenants' houses downtown, needles, people sleeping on front porches. So what the city is doing, or actually this is county, there was a needle exchange program that was set up, right, which was an awesome program, but now it's just a needle give out. So now the city, you don't have to give a needle to get a clean needle, they're just giving out needles. So now there's needles everywhere. So that is directly impacting your ability to find safe housing right there, the safe part. The other part of the safe part is that certain elements of the unhoused population do have mental issues, drug issues, and are not safe to be around most of the populations in Bloomington. So I had a rental house, unhoused man picked up a brick, threw it through their car window, the police came, talked to them, and he walked down the street. So those kids are never gonna feel safe again in this town. So the hand one is what I really wanted to address here. Yeah. Planning? Oh, the hand just. We're
required to enforce it.
Okay, so that's a planning rule. So I implore the planning department to please change that rule. Empty bedrooms right downtown, not good. Yeah.
There are different departments that oversee different things, but certainly welcome your feedback because it's.
Yeah.
You don't have to be in charge of that, but it's
right.
helpful for us to know what you're thinking.
Yeah. Okay, that's what I have to say about all that as a person that deals with a lot of tenants in this town, of all demographics, all of them, economic, racial, all of them. Thanks.
So much.
Deborah, they're asking if you can speak closer to the mic.
Okay, I think the mic is not on. It's not me, the mic is not on. At least that's my impression. The mic does not seem to be on. There's a switch on it. Oh, well, I haven't touched the switch since I'm leaving the switch where it was because it was on before and I didn't turn it off. Okay, I'd rather hand it over to people at that mic anyway, so. Please come.
Hello, I'm Phil Stafford, and I've been in the city more or less about 45 years, spending all that time working in the field of aging services and research and so forth. And this is kind of a segue to what Jennifer was talking about in terms of a need, the fact that most of the population growth in Bloomington is going to be due to the aging of the population and not just sort of absolute increase in numbers. And so we have some challenges ahead of us in this regard. I think when it comes to accessing affordable housing, it has a lot more to do with just the cost of the housing. And it's more a question of what's it going to cost to live there, because the cost of living combines multiple factors that include not only housing, but transportation, access to food, access to supportive services, civic services, and so forth. And there's a trend in our community and most around the country to seek greenfield, cheaper land for senior housing. And the consequence of that is it actually removes people from supportive services. And even though the housing may be less costly itself, it can be less affordable to live there. So we need to take all those into consideration when we're thinking about the numbers of affordable housing units needed and where those would be built. The way to increase affordable housing for older adults and people with disabilities as well is to enable them to live in situations where they can access these services by virtue of their own labor. Because as soon as we spin the housing outside of the core urban area of the city, we make it less accessible and less affordable for people, whether they're people with disabilities or older adults. This is older adults of any age, really. One economy of scale might be achieved in senior housing by looking for areas where there's a higher density of older adults currently residing. Sometimes those are called naturally occurring retirement communities, or NORCs. And I feel that the most obvious example in Bloomington are the neighborhoods that line the Beeline Trail on the west side of the Beeline Trail, all the way from, is it Maple Shades? Is that the name of the one on the north end? Maple Heights. To Broadview. And the population of people over the age of 50 and 55 in those neighborhoods is quite significant. And I would add that a large percentage, probably a third of the people within that segment are living alone. And for years, I've come into contact with women who live in those neighborhoods and wonder, are they going to be able to stay there as they age? Occasionally there's talk about women sharing housing. For a while, the three unrelated people rule kind of mitigated against that. The Commission on Aging, I think, if I'm not mistaken, in Unified Development Ordinance allows 5 or more unrelated adults if there's an age achieved, age 55 plus, although I don't know what percentage of that group have to be above 55. I can't really remember. Maybe Isabel does, but and that's not a wholesale solution to the problem either. But if we're going to build some multifamily housing that has an impact on the senior population, we should be looking at something in those neighborhoods, ideally on the margin of the neighborhood, on the trail in particular, so that it's not necessarily an intrusive large structure, deeper into the neighborhoods. So I think that's something where some area where we could be somewhat creative and looking for solutions. Of course, Hopewell development comes to mind for me with that kind of a solution. And there was one other thing I wanted to mention. Oh yes, a lot of senior housing is built with a revenue stream that provides an age restriction, usually 55 or 65 or 60. That mitigates against the availability of that housing for grandparents who might be raising grandchildren. HUD has a new initiative called Grand Families Housing, which is kind of a pilot, but it will support the development of grand families housing under HUD, which makes it a low-income option as well, which would be very valuable. 20% of the units in a Grand Families project have to be occupied by grandparents raising grandchildren. And I think that's something that we should look into as well, and might be mentioned in the consolidated plan as a possible avenue for development, reaching that population. I think that's what I had to say. Thanks.
But also certainly members of the public who are here, if there's folks who would like to speak and make public comment. Bill, you're muted.
Part of our job in the consolidated plan is to really kind of get insights related to workforce development, gaps in workforce development, missing skill sets. Any comments related to those types of things as it relates to economic development?
If you don't mind, Bill, could you just repeat the very beginning of what you said? Because there was something with the sound and we missed like the first sentence, I think.
Not sure I remembered it all, but basically in the consolidated plan, we have to report on economic development initiatives and really curious as to what the comments from the woman that was providing comments on the economic development initiatives, thoughts on workforce development, work gaps in the workforce development, needed skills that may be missing from the economic development environment, just gaps in the overall economic development system, educational needs that maybe aren't being met. We need to describe these types of needs in our community development strategic plan for the consolidated plan, and just curious as to some comments related to those items.
Great, thank you.
Was you referring to me, probably? So my name is Jen Pearl. I'm with the BEDC, and actually we'd be happy to do a separate meeting with you if that would be useful. We can provide trend lines on types of projects that we've seen, as well as what we're targeting for the community. Broadly speaking, our areas for growth in industries include life sciences, advanced manufacturing, defense. About a third of Crane's 6,000 person workforce lives in Monroe County and is commuting back and forth to Crane, and that kind of trend is continuing as they grow. As well as tech and microelectronics. A lot of our manufacturing base actually commutes from outside of Monroe County, so you're seeing that happening a lot. We also are seeing, again, the aging population that I mentioned as well. And we have an amazing opportunity here to be retaining workers, recent graduates from IU, but if they can't find a place to live among the housing that we have, they're just as quickly going to move on to wherever they can find an opportunity. But yeah, we would be very happy to sit down and talk about that more. I also wanted to piggyback on the gentleman who spoke earlier. We have also seen, when it comes to retirees, people who actually want to get into smaller homes, but with interest rates what they are, it makes no sense to do so. So our kind of operating assumption based on what we've seen is a lot of people are sitting on homes that they could be freeing up just because the economics don't make sense. So it'd be very interesting to find out if there are kind of, innovative programs out there to make it financially feasible for people to make the switch. Thank you.
I'm just going to quick add, prompted by Jen's comments, just one, that this is, again, a renewal of a 5-year plan. So some of the things, I was just thinking about this with the conversation about people migrating into Monroe County for jobs, is I'd be curious, and I bet BEDC has this information, if you might share it, we'll have some contact information at the end for one, that survey, if you haven't taken it, if you know people who'd like to take it, as well as Anna's email to send documents, studies that you may have that might be useful for this. And I'm mentioning that because I'm kind of curious what the in-migration to Monroe County for employment has been, how that's changed over the last 5 years. Because I suspect, again, without having seen the data, that as housing prices go up and people move further out, you're more likely to have more people commuting into Monroe County that might have been 5 years ago, possibly. So just that would be some interesting data to have and would be helpful for the study that we're doing to produce these plans.
We can share that data. 17% of the workforce, but our largest employers are reporting up to half of their employees are coming in from the outside.
Okay, so I'm just going to repeat it into the mic, but Jen's saying that, I'm sorry, what was the 17%? 17%
overall.
Overall. So 17% overall are migrating into Monroe County to work, but some employers are reporting as much as half of their employees. So depending on the industry, perhaps, maybe where the location is and what kind of price point they need in terms of housing and salaries. So all good information to realize that even if you get an average, looking a little more closely into some of the details can also be helpful. Thank you.
We have somebody online.
Cynthia online has a question. So we have Cynthia, would you be able to speak? This is online. We're trying to make sure we get the online comments as well.
Prospect Hill. And something that hasn't been talked about before is covenants and subdivisions. Each subdivision and several plots of land have their own covenants, which precludes an empty nester who might live in a 5-bedroom house or a house that has an adequate and complete basement or an excellent sized garage that could be rented out to either seniors or students. But their covenant for the neighborhood plots precludes renting. And each neighborhood really needs to determine how they could change their covenants. Most of the covenants have an expiry date that's automatically renewed, but if the neighbors get together and redefine the covenants for their neighborhoods, then that would allow seniors who are in big empty houses or empty nesters to make a little bit more income and increase the density for the subdivision. Since Bloomington is only 5.5 miles across, that means that even the distant subdivisions are only 2 miles from the core where jobs and school and library and banks are. And this it doesn't require a great deal of effort. It would just make it so that the neighborhoods could work together. Many of the neighborhoods have their neighborhood associations, and it would be something that could come through hand to help. I have given a number of presentations about covenants and did a summation of 14 different covenants in neighborhoods, and a few neighborhoods have changed their covenants. And that might allow for increased density and also make it so that seniors could make a little bit more money in their large houses and also have company. That might be younger people, but that's an untapped resource that might serve neighborhoods, might serve seniors, and might also serve people who are looking for lower cost housing, since all the new apartments that we have are very often priced out, and the new construction is also out of people's range of economy. And I'd be glad to talk with anybody who wants more information about covenants. Thanks so much.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Definitely some of the invisible land use controls besides the zoning that's the public land use controls, but to understand the role that covenants can play. Thank you. Are there other folks online who have been interested in speaking? We want to make sure that you have the opportunity to do so. Seems like not just yet, but I'll definitely move back and forth, and if there's, to make sure that we have that. So again, appreciate both folks who are here in person as well as online to understand some of the barriers that people in the community face when trying to access affordable housing, and getting a better sense of how current city policies and programs may impact the ability to find safe and affordable housing, as well as what's working well, and then maybe there's examples you know of from other communities, what might be missing, or even what exists but maybe what we should build up and expand to be able to make them benefit more people. If we can put the questions back up, that's helpful, as just to give us some conversation starters, even though I realize that when people are speaking online, we might need to toggle back and forth. Thank you. I'll also just remind folks that in addition to safe and affordable housing, one of the documents is the access to analysis of impediments to fair housing choice and just the fair housing questions. It's helpful to have a sense if you have experience or if you know of others who've had experiences with discrimination, difficulty with access, and again, this can be either for home buyers or renters. Both can experience different forms of discrimination, and based on those 7 protected classes that were mentioned earlier. So just to encourage any feedback you may have on that as well. Cynthia, would you like to come back on, please?
Sure. Here's a short thing that came up during the sustainability large survey and project that happened, God, I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago, that there was no connection or no communication or no good way for low-income renters who were responsible and have good records to be in touch with Section 8 housing landlords. So it was hard for them to find Section 8 housing that wasn't in a large subdivision. There are some landlords who offer Section 8 housing, but the people who needed that had no way of finding them. It was almost all word of mouth, and that was not very effective. And one more possibility is there any possibility that realtors and or these large rental apartments that have been built lately, is there any possibility there could be a trend where they would voluntarily offer an apartment to low-income people with good references to compete a little bit with one another? It would be such a contribution to low-income housing. It would be such a contribution to reduce a little bit of the inequity in low income and possibilities for people who are trying to raise themselves up if the large apartment rentals would begin a trend of offering one apartment in their large buildings. That could be something that could be facilitated by the Chamber of Commerce or the Board of Realtors, or it could be a trend that started. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Definitely finding more opportunities for people with housing choice vouchers, also known as Section 8 vouchers, to be able to rent and use their vouchers is valuable. Lots of different opportunities for that. I know that the Bloomington Housing Authority is certainly active in trying to connect their clients with vouchers with housing opportunities, and looking for hearing ideas of what else could be done is helpful as well. So thank you for sharing that. Do you feel like there are any specific groups in the community? Again, we just heard about folks with vouchers may have more difficulty finding the housing that they need, even with a guaranteed form of payment. It's still property owners, landlords' choice of whether they choose to accept a voucher or not. So that's a little different than where fair housing comes in, because that's not one of the protected classes. But if there are other specific groups that face greater challenges, certainly what was mentioned earlier in terms of the need to connect transportation and housing is an important consideration, because even if housing is lower cost, other costs include being able to get to work, school, etc. And if transportation is difficult, that can make it more challenging, even if the housing is lower cost. So looking at ways to lower the challenges that people have finding affordable housing, especially that's well connected to other resources. Is that number 5 you're referring to? I'm kind of circling around that a little bit, in the sense of these are very housing specific questions, but as Bill was noting earlier, the scope of these documents is really looking at more broadly yes, the CDBG and Home Investment Partnership funds definitely support safe and affordable housing, but especially CDBG is looking at broader priorities in the community, such as workforce development, job access, transportation access, health care, child care. Those are all things that are part of a healthy community. And so just looking at the other aspects that influence access to affordable housing, because it's not just about the cost of the housing, it's about the cost of access to other resources as well, or the availability of those resources.
Single parents for item number 5.
Mm-hmm.
I have a single parent colleague that's paying more for a 3-bedroom apartment than I pay for my mortgage for a 3-bedroom house. And
Right.
they are struggling in intensity.
So I'm just repeating again for the purpose of the mic, just single parents certainly face challenges in terms of they may need a larger unit with more bedrooms so for their whole family, but of course if it's a single parent they likely have a single income, and so that can make the cost of renting a 3-bedroom apartment more than perhaps a mortgage on a 3-bedroom home. And so trying to figure out how to tackle those challenges, because we all know that homeowners benefit from fixed housing costs that de facto get lower over time with a fixed rate or fixed 30-year mortgage, whereas rents can go up. And so that, in addition to access, even if finding a 3-bedroom apartment. So those are good points. Appreciate your sharing that. Any other public comment? I do want to share the information about the survey, just so that's up and people know it's there. Again, ideally, if there's things that you think of later that you didn't get to share today and would like to, the survey is a place to do that. There it is. Thank you. That's the link. It's also available in Spanish. Or especially if you can share with others that maybe didn't get a chance to come to one of the public meetings. I think it was earlier this week, but I think I'd heard we had 160 responses at one point, so it's definitely a valuable way that people have to share their input, and so would like to make sure that you have access to that as well for yourself or for others. And then finally, if we can just go to the last slide, which is contact information. I'd mentioned earlier that it's really helpful if you know of or have access to either studies that have already been completed, or if you're thinking about data, information that maybe could be gathered from other sources that would be helpful to have. It's something that is useful for the overall qualitative and quantitative scope of updating these documents, especially because a lot of the general data that's available is census data, and that's certainly down by census block is important, but when we get some of the either anecdotal or local data that is very specific to the city of Bloomington's population, that's extremely helpful. So just want to encourage you to share information that you may have that may be useful to for the purposes of this effort. So maybe I'll do one last call out for, please come to the mic. Thank you so much.
Sorry, just trying to get a little higher, kind of tall.
There you go. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Rebecca Haviland. I just wanted to come here tonight. I was encouraged to. I have attended 2 of the meetings previously over the past couple months at the Government Center building and at City Hall. I recently been homeless for a couple years. I know about this. I experienced it firsthand. It took me 2 years to get out of a friend's place to finally accomplish getting an apartment. And I got a job working at Centerstone. They hire, not exclusively, but largely ex-cons and the homeless, which is my salvation, just to get a job. I want to comment on one lady who made a comment about the needles that they find, about the needle exchange program that they have. And I agree with there's something else needs to be tried, something needs to be done. My job is landscaping, picking up trash off of the sidewalks and streets to help beautify the streets of Bloomington. And I would like to know a little more about covenants. I'm here as a representative of the homeless, those who are still homeless. I asked some of them, what would they like to see talked about or discussed? And a couple of them brought up they would like to see more bathrooms, even porta potties across Bloomington in the areas where they're at, because places where they may try to use a bathroom like Circle K often don't allow bathroom use except for staff because of some of the homeless abusing the bathrooms, shooting up, using needles. I would just like to thank you all so much for taking an interest in this. Really appreciate it. Thank you. It's important, me anyway, to step out in the spirit of love in all that I do and say. And thank you for reaching out and taking an interest in the homeless and looking and searching for answers. Because we may not have all the answers right now. And we discussed tonight, there's room for improvement, but it's working. It's working for the peace and dignity of each homeless person that we collectively help to find an apartment, to help find a job. And at Centerstone today, I was encouraged to come on over. I said I would last week to this, take a few notes on it, and I asked if I could get a ride over here. People's schedules were busy. I finally figured out the bus schedule to get a ride. Got over here by a bus, had to do some walking. I'm unfamiliar with this part of town, so when we're done here, if someone would be willing to volunteer to give me a ride at least down to Walnut where I could hook it the rest away, I would so much appreciate it. Thank you so much for your time and your interest in this.
Thank you, Rebecca. I really appreciate your coming out tonight and your comments. I appreciate all of you for being here tonight. It's really valued to have your listening and your words. Appreciate that so much. We are kind of towards the end of our time, but certainly encourage anybody else who would like to have one last comment either at the mic or online to have the opportunity to do so. Here's we've maybe completed our public comment, but I hope you've again been able to think about ideas and comments that you're welcome to share on that survey. Again, it's often something that maybe occurs to you later or that you may be able to share with others as well. So thank you so much for your time and attention tonight, and we look forward to sharing the public version of you in the spring. Thanks.
Thank you.